We're back.
Yeah, we are.
We did
All
it.
right. We got Mitch. We got Catherine. We got Tasha. Do we lose Gabriella in the ether? That is gold.
There she is.
Which is
Amazing. The gang is all here. And I forget what movie or TV show it is, but my brain's just like, and we're back. I don't remember what that's from, but that's just coming to mind here. Welcome back to People Ops Track here at Startup Boston Week. If you haven't seen my face yet today, but you probably have, I'm Allison Sproul, and I am an event organizer for the week. So on my screen here, I am just going to call out that there are more than one session happening right now. And you are currently sitting in, that's not the title of any of ours, is it? Well, technical difficulties. I'm going to stop sharing that. Right now, you are sitting in Through Thick and Thin, How to Engage and Retain Employees Through Challenging Circumstances. This is a part of the People Ops track. There are also events from the software engineering track as well as the hardware engineering track happening right now. So if you meant to be in one of those, you can always click the agenda button at the top of your screen to navigate to where you're hoping to be. Now, before I hand things over to Catherine, one thing I would just love to hear is where is everybody dialing in from today? I'm personally in Cambridge, Mass. Mitchell, where are you at?
North Andover, Mass.
All right. Local. Catherine?
Newton, so also local.
Cool. Kitty?
Tasha.
Tasha, oh my God.
No, I'm in Boston.
For coffee. And Gabriella?
I'm in Winchester, so also local, and it sounds like the landscapers just started, so I apologize if that's really loud.
No worries at all. We did lose your video here too, Gabriella. I'm not sure if that was intentional. But yes, so audience members, if you could please just drop into the chat where you're dialing in from today. We're super curious to hear. Earlier today, we had somebody on from China, literally a 12-hour time difference. So I hope they're asleep now. That was for our 8 a.m. session. We also had folks from Zurich and Switzerland. We had somebody signing on from Estonia. We had somebody from Nigeria. So really international crowd today. It's been awesome to see. Okay. Now, one last thing I will highlight is that, as a reminder, we absolutely love questions. So please use that Q&A tab on the far right of your screen to submit any questions that you may have during the session. This is why we created the conference. It's to get your questions and learn a whole bunch. So with that, I will pass it over to Catherine.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for being here. As you all probably already know, today we're here to unpack both the tactical and the human side of employee engagement. I know that Allison did a little bit of an intro for all of our awesome panelists, but thought we could quickly go around the room and everyone could just share a little bit more about themselves and also why they decided to join this panel. So Tasha, you mind kicking things off?
Sure. Thanks, Catherine. Hi, everyone. My name is Tasha Kitty. I am a CEO and president of Smart Startup HR. We're a small HR consulting firm based in Boston, but we have folks we work with across the states. Why am I here? Why did I pick this one? Why didn't I? I feel like last year was the HR Super Bowl. We had everything from, really big, dramatic hornets. What were they? Killer hornets. We all went remote. There were a pandemic. Just lots going on. The George Floyd murder. There's just so many things that happened, and all of it found its way into the workplace. And there's no playbook for that in the terms of HR and where we work. So we all really had to start from scratch in this world of a pandemic. So when I think about the topic of today, which is kind of the through the thick and thin, that's really how we've started off in the last year. So I'm happy to be here and chat a little bit more about that.
Awesome. Thank you, Tasha. Mitchell, how about you?
Thank you. So Mitchell Schneer, I have been in the industry now for about 37 years, long time. People always second guess that, but I swear it's true. I am with right now Google. Our company Actifio was purchased by Google in December, so I'm a people partner there, but grew the Actifio organization from 35 people up to 500 and then got bought by one of the big guys. So why am I here? You know, I think this year is finally, as Tasha was saying, given us a chance to kind of move to the top of the funnel, HR. So we're a lot more important, and we're getting the recognition that we need to get, and people are leaning on us so much more today than ever before, which is great. Maybe a little bit too much, but it's really a great time to kind of expose who we are, what we can do, and how much we can offer.
Yeah, love that. Awesome. And then Gabriella.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gabriella McManus, currently SVP of Drizzly, or SVP of People Operations at Drizzly. And I'm so sorry. First of all, I want to check. Can you all hear me? I know also Allison said that my video wasn't on, so I don't know if it's on or not. So anyone just give me a thumbs up if anything's working, or just throw it in the chat. But I've been at Drizzly for just under 4 years, and we've seen a lot of growth. And just as many companies did, there was a lot of opportunities for people operations to definitely be on the forefront over this past year. So I'm excited about this panel because, again, I think what I also saw last year is a lot of people operations professionals coming together and really creating and fostering community. And so for me, it was an extension of that. That was one of the main reasons, is being able to talk about a topic that I think is really important, like retaining talent and attracting talent, and then also kind of furthering the community that we have that started to establish.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you all for being here. I'm Catherine Dowd. I'm the Director of People over at Bamboo Health, which is formerly Patient Ping, and I'm your moderator. So we'll jump right in and would love to hear from you all how you support employee engagement when individuals are undergoing difficulties in their personal lives. So big question, really the reason we're here today. Is there anyone who wants to kind of jump in to kick things off? All right, Mitchell, you're the only one unmuted, so you're getting the call out.
Oh my God, I'm only muted. All right. So how do we support employee engagement? So, you know, under the difficult times, obviously we've been under some very stressful times. As Tasha mentioned, this probably, you know, the hardest time for HR, because that we've had everything you can think of, you know, be thrown at us, and employees as well. So, you know, how do we kind of recognize it? What we have done at Actifio as well as Google is just talk with as many of our employees as possible, build groups that we can voice, you know, what we're feeling, how we're feeling, and put together programs on how people can voice what they're feeling, but not only what they're feeling, but how we can kind of put some structure behind how they can get better, and how we can, you know, I don't know, move the needle per se on making employees feel better about, you know, what's happening within their lives. It's a time right now that we're not hiding behind things as much as we did before. So we want to make sure that people understand it. And, you know, from the George Floyd situation, you know, we brought it to the attention of many groups about, you know, what Black Americans are going through with the COVID, what happened with COVID, you know, what's happening at your homes. We had employees that lost parents. We had employees that lost aunts and uncles, you know, within a very short period of time. What are they feeling? How can we help? How can we be supportive? I think we became much more of a listening organization, but also bringing people into these panels that can talk about what they're feeling and what we can do to kind of make a change.
I can add on to that, Catherine. I think a lot of what Mitchell said is important. And one of the things that I've counseled some of our clients on is just to anchor in humanity, right? There is a lot of things in the last 18 months or so that really showed us that we were human, and we needed to really anchor in that. To Mitchell's earlier point, whether it's going to buy a stack of bereavement cards just because we knew that there were situations like this that could happen, right? It was things like, you know what, let's change our gym benefit to a wellness benefit. Maybe someone could benefit from Reiki if that's what they wanted to do, or a yoga session, or some online gratitude courses. It's those things that really support, I felt, folks who are out there and trying to work and trying to live, those who are isolated from friends, families, and loved ones, or that was their only sense of social aspect, right? Coming from the tech space, we had a lot of folks who just found their social aspect at work. And so removing that abruptly is really tough for folks. So when you anchor in humanity, I think it really goes a long way for people on your team.
Yeah, if I could plus one that and just add, I love what you both said, and just listening and creating that space for people also shows such degree of care, and it makes them feel safe, because that's what we try to do at Drizzly, is also incorporate that idea of having that flexibility, because things sometimes there were so many stressors last year that your body might not even be ready to process that for weeks or days to come. So giving people that flexibility, but trying to do those little things, I think all of those foster just more psychological safety, which then kind of breeds more vulnerability and more discussion. So plus one to both of you. I think what you both did was amazing.
Awesome. So early to be jumping in, but I do want to publish a quick poll here. So I just published it, so I hope it's on the screen for y'all. But would you feel safe to ask for support from your company if you were overwhelmed by stress, worry, sadness, or other issues in your personal life? So if everyone on the call could take a moment and respond to this, we'll give it kind of a minute just to see kind of where people land. All right. Oh, still changing. All right, I'll give it another couple seconds here. All right. I'm going to close the poll, but it looks like we're coming in at pretty close to 50-50 here, which I think is kind of interesting. So would love to hear, I know you all touched on the point of kind of creating an environment where you're listening and supporting and helping employees, but how do you create a safe, psychologically safe space, as you mentioned, Gabriella, so that employees will engage and are willing to come to you, if they do need something?
I think it's a little bit different for each person, but I think first off, declaring your intent. You can't just say, share with me you are safe, and assume that everyone's going to feel that way. People are going to interpret it and also assimilate that information kind of into their own experiences, where some people really lead with trust, some people you really have to earn it. So I think it starts with being intentional, kind of declaring that and creating that space for people, asking the questions and then truly listening. Letting them know that whether it's one-on-one meetings or listening circles or whatever opportunities you have, letting them know kind of the intent behind like why you have those programs in place, and then encouraging them, but also not admonishing people if they don't want to utilize those. We leverage an internal coaching company, so people can talk, even if they don't want to talk internally, they can use any of our coaches. So I think that people are going to pay attention to all of the other ways that you're coming together as an organization, all the other behaviors, and I think that's really going to help them feel either more psychologically safe or less. It can't just be done by one person or one department. I think all of the managers and all of the leaders have to show up and model the right behaviors to really foster that environment.
Yeah, I think in the space of just creating that environment for folks, leader vulnerability is hugely important. I remember being in a kind of really big online virtual meeting, and an employee very publicly admit that they were struggling. They were struggling even more so being remote than in the office visually, with being one of few in an organization. She was a Black woman, and as a leader in that organization, very publicly, I agreed with her, and I validated what happened and could really understand and empathize with what she was feeling psychologically when she thought about psychological safety. Again, on the heels of a very difficult year for our country, I felt like that was a way to really step out and show some leader vulnerability. We are, in fact, the folks who kind of drive, or at least set the tone for culture, what it looks like, and can help to create that both on the organizational level, but within our specific functions. So when I think about creating a safe space I think that there's a lot of accountability to our leaders, whether they're managers, supervisors, or top C-suite folks. That leader vulnerability goes a long way for people on your team.
Yeah, again, +1 to everything what's been said so far. We also created some anonymous, features or ways that people can come to talk about what's happening. The one-on-one with managers, more one-on-ones than normal. We hired a consultant counselor to come in that people could, have one-on-one time with, which really worked out, fairly well. The woman was booked all the time. Reaching out, to individuals if you see, that there's some vulnerabilities, as Tasha has meant, but also be aware of the environment. So, you have someone that's in a meeting and you can see that they're struggling a little bit. And then, approach them and say, look, how's everything going? What's going on? How can we help you? But also, be, I guess, empathetic enough to be aware of what's going on and how can I create a different environment for you. Meaning that we had a particular employee that was really struggling with the whole balance. She and her husband had 4 kids at home and they both were working at home, and it really, really took a lot out of them. And she shared this with us, and she said what would really help, and again, listen and be empathetic and be okay with this because it's going to happen. Can I start my day at 10 o'clock in the morning? Can I make sure that I have the X amount of time in the afternoon for breaks for the kids? Can I make sure that I clock out at 5 and then I'll be back online at a certain time? And we were like, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And then when people would, reach out to her, she'd have out of the office, out of those particular times. And then once we did that for her and showed that we were going to step up and we were going to accommodate her, then we got other people that came to us. So I think that really is the proof is including be empathetic, but also show that you're going to make a difference. If you don't, then you're just words.
Yeah, I think it's really, really valuable to talk about kind of accountability and have that clarity even within your own organization, kind of who's accountable for engagement and for creating safe space for employees. How do you get the buy-in for that? Like, why is this important? So kind of said another way, if you have leadership who's not taking accountability, who's not showing vulnerability, how would you sell them on the value of them buying into that?
I mean, at the very core, it's, do you want to have a productive and engaged team? It's like, if you have a leader that you have to sell on being engaged with people who work with and for them, then maybe you want to reevaluate your leaders. I mean, it to me it's one of those things that should come hand in hand with running a team or running a function or leading an organization, that you want your team to be engaged and you want your folks to be able to be their best selves at work and to be as productive as possible at work. And again, I mean, I can't stress enough the humanity piece. So if you have a leader, especially during these moments, who just, sell me on engagement, I think that's a tough space to be as someone who probably has that leader reporting to them or working for them. I think it's a bit of an eye opener there.
I would also, say that it's been an eye-opening experience for some managers. We all have experienced managers that said, no way, no one can work from home. That's the way it is. I had a very dear friend of mine that worked for me for many, many years. I worked for many years. He literally laid someone off at the company he went to just weeks before COVID was announced. And then he hired the person back, begged them to come back, because the reality is that we're all experiencing this. I think it was a little bit easier for us to sell this to executives right now because of everything that was going on. So they were more empathetic and more open-minded to it. But let's face it, managers still want productivity, and they leaned on us to say, how are we going to get that and how are we going to make it happen in the way that they wanted it. So I think that the education part came in is that let's look at what has happened over the last couple of months. Let's look at productivity, look at the data, whatever way you kind of compare it, and see what we've done and how well we've done. So if your concern is that we're going to lose productivity, we're going to lose some momentum. Look at what we've done that we really haven't. I mean, I don't know in many organizations, but and I can't, quote numbers and stuff, but for Actifio as well as Google, we had like double-digit growth during the whole pandemic. So, and I think a lot of people did. So it was easy to give them the information. You definitely have to educate some senior level executives, but it was a little bit easier, and I'd love to hear from the other panelists, a little bit easier now during COVID and during what's happening in the world than it was in the past.
Yeah, totally. I think it's been an eye opener for folks. Even that example you gave, where the person tried to bring the other one back, post COVID, and what's happened. Certainly easier now. And I think another thing that makes it easier is that, before your talent pool was a bit limited. Even if you were a large company, most folks are looking at folks who are close to an office or wanted to bring them into a site. Your talent pool is very different now in 2021, with folks who are either gone from being in an office to either remote first, or have announced that they'll have a hybrid culture post pandemic. And what that's done is it's opened up your talent pool, right? Gone are the reasons of, we can't find anyone locally who can do this, or even when you think of it from a diversity perspective, if you're in a fairly homogenous region, diversity may be lacking, but now you have such great reach and scope. So not only is it, hey, it's easier for some leaders to understand or wrap their head around engagement, it's also employees can make the choice. Right? They can say, you know what, I can work for this company on a whole nother coast who has this culture or this environment of supporting their teams and supporting their employees in a way that feels engaging to me as an individual. And that option is there. It didn't exist in that way 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think that is so true. And kind of a follow-up to that is, how are you all measuring engagement? Is it surveys, and talking to people? Kind of what are the main factors in how you measure engagement in your companies?
Yeah, we do twice a year kind of full on engagement survey. We utilize the Great Place to Work, and then kind of modify.
I see Gabriella's off. I didn't want to jump back in. I didn't want to hold the mic too long. For engaging, at least some of the clients that I work with, ways that we are engaging if folks are, gauging if folks are engaged is a few different things. One, it's not really relying on one source, right? Mm-hmm. Just like if in person, you have different types of learners, different types of folks who like to do things in different ways and how to express themselves. So it's really not relying on one source rather than relying on multiple sources. Are we giving folks the option to have cameras on, right? And to not? Are we giving folks the option to join into a Slack, forum or a Slack survey? And it's making sure that you're providing all these different avenues for people to be engaged, right? Can they be engaged online? Can they be engaged in a video chat? Can they be engaged in something like a team building event online? And just providing different ways for that. We're still recognizing that there's this level of individuality that was a little bit ripped when you pull out and you go remote. Folks who, again, like to be in the office. Me, for one, I'm in an office now. I like to be around folks. And so when you have different avenues for people to be engaged, and you're offering those up in ways that aren't just very unique or siloed, I think one, that's a good way to measure, right? Are you reaching all the folks? And I think another way to measure is those pulse checks. We don't want anyone to get survey fatigue while we're out and, constantly give them a survey, especially if we don't have the time and opportunity to see the impact or the effect. But you can do quick polls. You can do pulse checks with folks and see how they're doing. And I also think it's just really critical for that person who has direct reports to find out the best way to stay connected with their team. One of the things I saw when we first all kind of went remote was that folks were like, oh, we need to stay together. We need to make everything a call and, set up a meeting for this. And then you had meeting fatigue because you were meeting on things that could have really been an email, or it could have really been an online conversation. So I think really using your managers, your frontline managers who have those really close connections to team members to help you with how do you build a metric around that? How much are your teams engaged?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Tasha. Gabriella, did you have something to add there?
I was just saying we do twice a year engagement surveys, do some pulse surveys, and then we just look at, in addition to that, just like the work that's being done, kind of project completion, just to get a different sense from a productivity side. Sorry, I'm looking at Tasha. Are you not able to hear me?
I can hear you, Gabriella.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Hope everyone else can too. Oh no, just Tasha.
Okay. No. So that's it. I think there's a lot of different ways you can measure engagement. The other thing too is I think even asking your employees, okay, how do you show us that you're engaged? Or when you do measure engagement, sharing those results. So you can say like, this is the engagement score. This looks pretty great. And that way they can respond, because they might say, well, I kind of interpreted the question this way. So I think even when you do those surveys, making sure that you're having roundtables to have dialogue and unpack what you're finding, because the data can tell two different stories.
Oh yeah, we always ask, who is leadership? Like the employees are going to think one thing, someone else might think another thing. When questions asked about leadership, it's always like, but who is that? I'm like, oh boy, follow-up survey. Are there any questions that you find especially valuable on an engagement survey? Is there like that one question that you always want to make sure you include because you find that it does give you kind of a really helpful sense of employee engagement?
For me, I like looking at a lot of different factors.
Mm-hmm.
Because since we do two big robust surveys, we also look at it to kind of help us prioritize our people programs or any initiatives that we have. But I think especially now, obviously questions around well-being are really important,
Yep.
mental health. The other piece that I think is also important is also just thinking about personal involvement. When people feel more involved in the decision-making, decisions that impact their jobs, they typically have increased job satisfaction because they feel that they have a deeper sense of autonomy. And when people have a greater sense of job satisfaction, that's typically correlated to retention. So for me, those are kind of the key areas that I really like to focus on.
Yeah.
I want to jump on something that Gabriella said, and I'm not going to really add much more because I think it's all, what she talked about is what we do as well. But the personal involvement. So I come from a small, organization, small team. I didn't have the pleasures of having, big HR team, and the people I did have were amazing. So, kudos to them. They definitely made me look good. But the one thing that we tried to do is not come up with surveys that we wanted to come up with that HR came up with. So I always had, activity committees and went out to the, general public and brought people in from different groups and said, look, we're putting these together. What do you think? What questions should we ask? How would you respond? Where would you respond? Would it be anonymous? Would it be, in a public setting? And that really helped us a great deal in getting more honesty when it came to, engagements and, the measurements. Again, you look at what is out there. We instructed our employees or managers and leaders to be more clear about what their expectations was and what they wanted to, the results that they wanted to get from their employees. So then everyone knew what it was, because you're in a different environment. I'm going to take my dog out. I'm going to do certain things within the the work day that I would not normally do if I was at work in the office. So I'm looking for A, B, and C to get done within 2 or 3 days. So be a lot more clear, setting the expectations, so then people knew. And it worked out, pretty well. Not in every situation, but pretty well.
That's really interesting. I've actually never heard of going to employees for questions. That's a really interesting idea. I love that. That's great. Go to the source. I'd love to ask something a little more specific questions around kind of the past year and what some of you were able to implement at your companies. I think we've talked more kind of high level generally about engagement and supporting employees during challenging times. But was there anything specific that was really successful for you and your teams in regards to keeping employees engaged in a remote environment?
I don't know if there was one thing. I think it was the impact of a lot of little things strung together. And I think that the most important piece was that there was intentionality behind it. I think some things that we may do, some other companies may try, may not try. And it's not that it would work for anyone, but I think people just realized, oh, they're thinking of us. They're being intentional about this. So for us, we tried to really quickly put together a how to work remote book before we went remote. So I have an amazing team that was able to put something together very quickly. And I think people felt supported through that transition. Then there were frequent check-ins. even something small, like there was a great little startup that was doing little plants, and people got to pick the plant, right? They got to say if they had sunlight, if they didn't have sunlight, if they wanted this. And we got more feedback about that even 2 years later, where people still post pictures of, oh, look at my they called their COVID plants. Look at my COVID plant, how it's grown. But it was something really simple and nice that, again, when we were thinking about, do we do stipends and enhance your work from home stipend, and how do we shift our perks? Sometimes it's the smallest things, I think, that mean just a whole lot more for people. For us, it was trying to be thoughtful and thinking about especially specific inflection points where it was more important to support people. Like, how could we be really intentional and make sure we didn't have people searching for the information, but we could kind of get them the right information at the right time. And then, especially with a lot of the social unrest, we were able to invest a little bit more heavily with our DEIB programs, and really make sure that, we had already kind of declared the year before that it was one of our strategic imperatives. So it was core to our strategy, but we didn't have as much traction around it externally. We were really focusing internally. And so last year we had a lot more energy. So we were able to engage people in projects outside of their day-to-day work, but really kind of leaning into our CSR efforts, our DEI efforts, and other efforts that are really important to them.
Awesome.
Tasha, you want to go, or?
Sorry, I was having technical difficulties, so I didn't even hear the question. So you go ahead, Mitch.
Okay, sure. So again, plus one of a lot of things that Gabriella had mentioned. There are things that we tried to do. I think, again, the thoughtfulness and the intentions behind it, were really the most important, being aware. But, we did lunch and learns in areas that, we didn't necessarily do the different topics. We did meet and greets. We would put, people into a bucket, all the employees, and we pull them out 4 or 5 at a time. So then they could kind of get together and rotate with different groups, because as much as they didn't know each other when we were in 2 floors and we were, 200 people in Waltham, it's even worse being remote, because now you're never going to get an opportunity to talk with anyone. And even with people now, going off of the assignments at Google, we're still doing those type of meet and greet type, not meet and greets, but kind of saying goodbye to people, but getting people together and having those kind of Zoom calls. But the rotational meet and greets were really good. And surprisingly enough, I had someone just tell me the other day, I didn't know this person. We both worked for the company for 7 years, which is pretty incredible. I knew of the person, but I didn't know them, which really worked out well. Keep the groups really small. But informing people and not having them kind of have the anxiety of, what's next. So many employees said, Mitch, I'm just sitting home and I'm like, are we going to go back to work? Or are we not going to go back to work? You're going month to month. Sometimes you're going every 3 months. It's like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to live my life, whatever. So we finally, I talked to the executives. We had to make a decision. We're not doing it anymore. We're just not working, at the office. No more remote. No more in-house. So which really, really worked out pretty well. And as Gabriella said, the social injustice and unrest that we had, whether it was political or it was, racially motivated, it was the perfect opportunity for us to educate our employees and to get them become more aware and also hear what they were feeling. And that, I can't even begin. We had one session that we had 40 people on and talk about what people felt and the comments that had been made to them over the years that people just weren't aware of. And we had a specialist on board. I wasn't going to handle that myself. And the woman that we did was just incredible, because some of the comments that were very innocent ones, people were like, well, I guess I can understand why that would be, taken the wrong way. It really was eye-opening. It was a perfect opportunity for us to educate the greater population, because it was aware and it was also a captive audience.
I love that. One thing that I wanted to mention that we did at Drizzly as well, in incorporating those listening circles, we also kind of taught managers and anyone who wanted to learn how to host a listening circle, just how to do that, because for a lot of the issues that people were dealing with, they're not something that are going to be solved, right? There isn't a clear answer. And it's more about just being able to talk without judgment on how you're feeling and the unrest that people have. So that went a long way. And what we found is that a lot of managers and other people that kind of have taken on more natural leadership positions started hosting their own listening circles, just listening. So once it became organic throughout the company, people started connecting a little bit more and they felt really safe having that dialogue. So I think oftentimes too, even just and then also showcasing for your people what the company is doing. We, the education that Mitchell mentioned is so important. And we realized as a leadership team, we also needed to be educated. We each had our own experiences, speaking specifically of the social unrest that we saw. So we invested 25% of our time together as a leadership team, and still are, with a DEI advisor. So they come in once a month for a monthly meeting, and we do deep dives into that. And we would talk about this at our company meetings and say, this is what we're working on. This is sticky. We're still, wrestling with this. We're talking about this. And I think that vulnerability and that intention went a long way for our people. And then I think there's like simple things, like even big things that you almost forget about. We used to have monthly meetings, and now we have really short, that were 3 hours long. Now we have like 15-minute syncs, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there were some practical practices that you could change that just brought people together.
Yeah, Tasha, are you able to hear me? You're good. Awesome. So we're kind of talking about what was implemented to support people to keep engagement high going remote. Wondering if you had anything you'd like to add.
Lots of plus ones to the work that Mitchell and Gabriella have already used. And, I think some of the only thing that I didn't kind of hear that I know also became a thing were these kind of walk-in talks, right? Mm-hmm. Folks were just kind of stuck in the house a lot and wanted to get out. And a lot of leaders, managers moved their one-on-ones to a walk-in talk. Let's get outside. You go out and you walk, and I walk, and we talk. And that really helps us to kind of just connect on a different level. It offers that space, it offers that opportunity, and it made folks feel a little bit more connected to just step away in the middle of the day and do some things.
So we actually had a question come up in the chat, but I'll give kind of the skinnied version. But I think that everyone's what happens when employees maybe take advantage of the human side to HR that we're really trying to push right now? Have any of you experienced that, and how have you managed through that?
I mean, I think that's a really interesting question. I think that the human side of HR oftentimes comes across as really touchy-feely, but I think that the human side of HR can be really strategic and is aiming to like drive profitability and drive productivity at the very least. So there's always a business objective for why these programs exist. And so I think, especially as companies grow and you get more like people analytics and things of that nature, you're able to make better data-driven decisions that oftentimes at smaller companies you can't do if you don't have those resources. And so I think that's the kind of the first part, that I think all of these, it's not, if they're done well, even if some portion takes advantage, it still should drive the right result. Secondarily, I think that, this was a really hard year. So I think this is a year that you want to give people a little bit of space and a little bit of just grace. And then, because you don't know, what looks like taking advantage from some might actually be someone dealing with a really complex situation, maybe doesn't feel like they're able to talk through it. Now, on the third end, I did see a little spike in pockets of entitlement, and that's infuriating when you think about people around the world that were losing jobs, losing loved ones. We all lost freedom. When entitlement would pocket up, we addressed it. We addressed it very kind of vocally, publicly, and talked about like how, from our perspective, entitlement can really kill entrepreneurship, and that was the spirit that had really gotten us to be successful. And then I think also, if companies are finding themselves in situations where people might be taking advantage, I take a look at the hiring practices. Are the values really clearly articulated? Is that something that you're kind of hiring for through that process? And if people are also internally kind of behaving and showing up in a way that's really misaligned with the values, then it's okay to have, corrective coaching conversations. But I think it's that nuance of, does this need to be corrected, or is there an opportunity to really understand where this person's coming from? Because maybe I don't have a full picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, I love the corrective coaching conversation. That is a really good point, Gabrielle. And I think also when we try to make a determination of someone taking advantage, that puts you in a tough spot, right? How can you tell if someone is in fact taking advantage and or needing that time? I love the fact that the values exist. And that was exactly what I was going to say, Gabriella, is if you could just really sit with the values with folks and see if that's going awry. I think one of the worst things you can do is to stop managing them. I think you continue to manage their behavior, their performance, or whatever it is that you feel is starting to dovetail into something that it shouldn't, and reiterate that I'm here to support and I'm here to help you. However, what I need is, how can I support you in that way? How can I continue in that way? What are some things that we can do to help turn this around? So you don't want to kind of put your expectations, I think, to the wayside. I think it's all right. Do I need to pivot in what that looks like for you, and how can I support you in that way? Because we value our employees and we really want to make sure that they're here and being successful. Things have shifted, across the country. How can I shift to help you better before we go to that determination?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that, again, be aware of what's going on. Bad behavior is not something new. So if there's a pattern there, then you have to start recognizing that, and hopefully you've already recognized it, and maybe there needs to be a little bit more attention, spent with that employee. But past history, if the person has not done poorly and the person has done well, then, again, seek to understand and be understood. So, find out what's going on within that individual's life and figure out what the issues are. There were many conversations that we had, more than I thought we would have to have, with employees about, what's going on, what's happening. We're looking for these type of expectations, these deliverables, but they're not happening. So talk to them. And what we found out is that there were lots of things happening in their lives that, are related to COVID. Maybe someone was sick. Maybe someone started living with them. Maybe they got sick. Maybe they were embarrassed to talk about it because they didn't want people to have, the star of the, the COVID on them. So it's, there's lots of things that I think we learned from that, and it's uncharted territory. We don't know, what we're expecting, what we're not expecting, of employees when they're working from home. It's just different. So I think keeping an open mind, but I also believe what Tasha was saying is some good points about, how to kind of set the expectations and go through that with the individuals.
You touched on this a little bit when you started talking about values, but would love to hear how and if you all turned to your values or kind of how you would describe your company culture to help inform the ways that you engage and promote engagement with employees. Is that like a leading factor that you look to when you are thinking about engagement?
Yeah, I have a really small team now that I've started my own gig. But one of the things, for example, I mentioned earlier, I'm in an office. I offered up a co-working space for folks if they wanted to. And if they didn't have to take advantage of it. And I think that that's just a way to keep folks engaged. And again, give them options, whether you want to go in the office or not. If you're not comfortable yet, or if you don't feel like you'll ever be, that's fine as well. And so I think I go back to that nimbleness, that agility to support your team.
And how do you balance that kind of giving employees kind of the option for what works best for them, and also establishing norms? Video on, off, it's your choice. But like sometimes when you get on a call and like half the people are on, half are off, it's a little awkward. How do you kind of balance that?
So for us, video is optional. It's whatever's happening today. Not only is video, your fur friends are optional, and the occasional 7 or 8, or in my case, 20-year-old who comes in and asks for the keys to the car is also is also an option. And I think that some days people are ready to be on camera and some days they're not. And that should be okay. If ever I do have a time where you need to be on camera, I give a heads up. Hey, this is a camera call. And people really appreciate that. And if you don't get the heads up, then automatically it's a either or. You use your own judgment.
I find that sometimes when there's, because I know that the camera can be nice for that connection, but now people are multitasking so much with screens. There's sometimes that I find I get a better connection just on the phone with someone because you're really listening to what they're saying. And when I hear about, I've heard from, small percentage of managers. Sorry, my Dane, of course, is now moaning. So if you hear her, that's her. She wants to go out. So, oftentimes if you have, going to make me laugh. Some managers want to see people because they want to see the work. They want to make sure they're engaged. And that is more of a lack of trust. So I think just really asking yourself, why are these norms important? Are they important because they're signaling something else? And if there's a different behavior that you want, then describe that and really articulate your expectations. Or I agree with Tasha, there's times you're camera ready and there's times that you don't want to be. And I think that's absolutely okay. I always tell people never apologize for pets or kids or anything else going on. But, it's a really, really busy time. And I think you have to give people that grace. We don't know what people are going through, and it's a really hard time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You talked about values before and the culture and stuff. We have this care values that we talked about even more than we ever did before. And we actually sent it out to employees with little baskets and stuff like that. But I don't know if this is wrong or right. And I'd love to hear the opinions, but I don't know if our core values or our culture really came into play. It kept us strong when we went out of the office, but now we have to develop and create a new culture because it's so different. So I think that's been really tough, or at least tough for me, because people ask, what kind of culture you have? What kind of culture you have? Well, I don't know what kind of culture we have right now. We're trying to rebuild that. And then also with the camera on and off, I'm upset when people, get mad at people taking the camera off. I mean, again, there's so much happening in people's lives, and they're happening like right here, right at the spot. I mean, my daughter right in front of me has a whole workshop where she does her sewing and knitting and crocheting, and because this is the only spot I can be. So you hear that noise in the background. You talk about, the dog moaning to go out. I had two dogs one day moaning and moaning and moaning, and I'm literally throwing treats around the house. And someone asked me, "What are you doing?" Like they thought I was going through a seizure. I'm like, and they were a little upset at first about it. And I was like taken back. But this is the world we live in. If you are getting upset about that, then I just think you're in the wrong environment.
Mitchell, I love that you said that. I interviewed someone. She ended up taking the job, and she works for me now. And she told me, "Hey, Gabriella, with my interview with you, I thought you were like testing me." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Because I can get really focused in interviews. Apparently, my son got out of the shower, walked behind the screen, and just stood on his phone with like his towel. And she was like, and he's like an older teenager. She was like, "Was this like a test? Keep your eyes focused. Don't do this." And I was like, can you imagine that's the world that we're living in now, that like there's kids walking behind? But Catherine, to your earlier question about the values as well, at Drizzly, we have two core values. We care and we solve it. Mm-hmm. And our purpose statement is to be there when it matters, committed to life's moments and the people who create them. And I think for us, we did anchor on that a lot over these last 18 months. Even when George Floyd was murdered, and then, Breonna Taylor, and like we looked at it, and our CEO, we never wanted Drizzly to make political statements. And as we talked about it and talked about our values, we decided this isn't a political statement. This is a human statement. And if we care, we care about people. And so that we use that as a beacon, really, even when it came to our external comms, definitely when it came to our internal comms. So I think it's really important to kind of, if you're going to have values, making sure that you're anchoring to those values and that you're articulating why you're doing what you're doing and showing that alignment to your values, because it just continues to reinforce it for your folks.
Awesome. So kind of, you've all kind of, again, touched on this, but to be a little more specific, I think the political climate over the past year had a really strong impact on a lot of people. And, I think typically or traditionally it was, politics don't belong in the office. How did you kind of manage that and still support employees who were impacted or stressed about the political climate?
We did some listening circles over the course of like around the election. And we were really careful to really encourage people not to put political. We were saying we can discuss the issues, but we don't want to encourage. We encourage people to vote, and we actually took that day off so people could vote because we believe it should be a federal holiday. But we were very clear to tell people, like, we're not going to celebrate whomever wins. We're not going to talk about those things. We wanted people to feel comfortable and safe. And there were some employees, because we're primarily Boston based. And I think most people know that there's definitely certain leanings. We had some employees that came up and said, "Is it okay if you want to vote for this person to still work here? Like, where is that line?" And in being an inclusive culture, we want to make sure that anyone, regardless of political party, regardless of religious belief or of anything, feels comfortable and safe coming to work. So for us, it was a really fine line between we are going to listen, but we want to make sure we're not celebrating on any other way or making anyone feeling that we're encouraging any types of behaviors. So we were really, really intentional with our messaging. And whenever we would see people kind of post stuff in our internal Slack that maybe had a strong leaning, I would usually just like pull that person aside and just talk to them about what we were trying to do from an inclusivity perspective, that we really appreciate them sharing their opinions. but wanted to make sure that we were doing it in a way that fostered discussion and dialogue and wasn't potentially shutting someone down.
Wow, that's really interesting. That's amazing. Did anyone else have experiences with that?
I will tell you that it was a very, very tough time. We did have people that had very strong opinions one way or another. But again, I think, I know our CEO asked for people to, not push one particular agenda stronger than the other, because that it limited our inclusivity, within our environments. But it was really challenging. We had to look at each situation individually, and I wish I can say I had a great method to what it was. Gabrielle seems to have it under control, but we didn't have it as under control. We really had to speak a lot about it.
Yeah, I was just going to share, Catherine. I think that one of the biggest things that folks could have done during that time is just to give folks the opportunity in the space, right? A lot of organizations gave people the time off to go vote, to decompress, even the results, because the results were, I think that was the sticky part too. Like, you need some time off to digest the results, what that means and what that means for you as an individual or your community, etc. So I think that time, opportunity, and space was just hugely important.
Yeah. And thank you all for sharing. I know that's, can be a sensitive subject, but it's really helpful to hear how you all approach that and helped your employees through that. I'm going to throw up another quick. Oops, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, I was going to add, and thank you all for letting me take the dog out really quickly. But I just want to add, I think the other piece that was a little bit challenging for us was since we all of a sudden had employees all over the country, whereas before we only had employees in 3 different states, there was so much social unrest, right? There were riots that were happening in certain areas, lots of violence, shootings. And for us just to remind ourselves of, oh my goodness, we actually now have employees there. So you had to be really responsive, or candidates, right? I mean, there was crazy storms in the last year too, where people's homes were no longer safe. And you had to move out of just that tunnel vision of, or at least for me, that tunnel vision of just Boston centric. And I felt like I had to be so much more aware of current events happening across the country, because we now have employees there, candidates there, and how can we showcase those values there as well? So I think we remember some of those big things, but looking back, there were so many little things that happened last year as well. It just felt like the never ending, I don't know, like it was like a terrible marathon for a lot of it.
All right, I'm going to pull up another poll, and it's a little basic, but just wanted to hear from everyone who's dialed in if their companies have implemented new ways of supporting them during the pandemic. And we'll just see how the numbers float for a second here. So I'll give it about a minute. All right, I'm gonna give it a couple more seconds. All right. All right, there we go. We're jumping up on the S's a little bit there. All right, so it looks like we're landing at about 70-30 if changes were implemented during the pandemic. Which is interesting. Actually, I thought it might be a little higher than that. I thought it was gonna be like 100%, but maybe that's me living my own little world. But what I would love to hear from all of you, and I think we've touched on some of the positive things that have come out of the challenges that everyone has experienced over the past year plus now. But what are some things you really hope we keep, that everyone in people ops and HR really, really clings to and makes sure stays part of who we are and what we do?
Catherine, I just want to go back to that, just agility, the flexibility, especially with the workforce and the changing of the workforce. And, I can't say it enough to my clients who've gone from being fully in-house to having either a hybrid or a remote first culture, is that is kind of where I feel things are going. Those are the things that will kind of linger long after the pandemic. And I think that it's beneficial for organizations. I think it gives you the opportunity to expand your talent pool and to reduce costs, right? Costs from a workplace perspective and overhead perspective, but it does give you just a much more vast network and access to people who maybe had a hard time filling a role, or you couldn't find someone with the skill set locally or where your offices were. And I think that's going to be hugely important as you think about next steps.
As soon as I speak, she wants to shake. I completely agree. I think the agility, also the flexibility, for companies, I mean, this was a great time to kind of, we all had this massive experiment of going remote very, very quickly, and companies found out very quickly what they had to shift, what they had to transition, what they were really naturally good at, where they were struggling. And now companies almost get to reinvent themselves, right? Like, you can decide if you truly want to be an in-office company, or was that your default? You can decide what hybrid really looks like for you. You can decide what it means to be remote first for yourself. Autonomy. When you think about autonomy and how you even structure things, if you want to be an old school hierarchy, do you want to be more of a holacracy? Like, there's so many different things that you can now play with, that I think it really puts someone in a people ops perspective. They can be at the forefront of that discussion and should be leading those discussions internally, because all of those things have to be really intentional and anchored into that talent strategy. And then even from that perspective as well, when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, so often you hear people say, well, it's really hard, so we have to go more junior. I think that sometimes that's BS. It is really, really hard, but you can go senior if you know where to look. And I think before, people were restricted by geography. You're no longer restricted by geography if your company decides to open up. So, you can be competitive. You can think about your comm strategy. It's almost like you structure the whole company all over again in this. You have this unique moment to shift everything. And you can kind of blame it on COVID. There's that positive.
Yeah.
The only thing that I would say is +1 on everything. And I think right now I want to, leave in acceptance, flexibility, kindness, empathy. I think that's some of the things that we lacked as leaders, as well as even in our HR organization. I think we have really touched upon those things, that the acceptance piece, I think acceptance is greater than it's ever been today. So I hope that we keep that and keep the open-mindedness.
Awesome. So we do have just a couple minutes, and we had some specific questions come in. So just wanted to leave time to respond to those. Thank you. So one is from Palesh. Is it vital for remote teams to meet in person, say, quarterly? Does anyone want to jump in on that one?
I mean, I think it always depends. I personally am someone that loves that connection. So I think if you are going to get together, whether it's annually, semi-annually, or quarterly, figure out the cadence that works for you. Make sure it's special. Make sure you're really intentional on how you use that time to really drive and foster connection. But I think it really depends. It depends on the type of work that's being done. It depends on the different personalities. But I think some sort of cadence, so people that really need that community so they can come back together. But if it is only annually, then making sure that you're having other kind of connection touch points to really kind of foster that community.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think there should be some form of getting together at some point, some way, somehow. But I think it's based on the company itself.
I love it. At some point, right? Like we're still in a pandemic. I think that's what's still tough. And that target's still changing, which is hard for people. And then the last one, just wanted to make sure to throw up here before we hop off. But Gabriella, the coaching company you used, are you able to share that with us?
Yeah, I actually put it in the chat as well.
Thank you.
We use Bravely. So Bravely, they have coaching. Anyone can call it anytime. It's also anonymous. So we leverage it not only from a coaching and professional development. It's kind of embedded into everything in our L&D program, but they can also be used as almost like a whistleblower hotline if you think that you need that as well. Hopefully you don't need that. but it's like dual purpose, and you get great reporting from it.
Cool. Awesome. Well, you guys have answered all of my questions. You've answered everyone else's questions. So thank you so much. This was really, really enlightening. It was wonderful to hear from all of you, all different perspectives from different size companies, and even someone who helps startups as well, which is awesome. I'm going to turn it back over to Allison.
Awesome. Thanks, Catherine. Thank you so much, Tasha, Mitch, and Gabriella, for your amazing insights. I was just over here like fiercely like, yes, like the whole time, like tweeting and nodding furiously. So hopefully our audience here was having the same reactions over here, just all the praise hands. Thank you so much for coming out to our event today, everyone. If you want to check out, we do have more awesome content coming up both today and the rest of this week. So be sure at any time to click on the agenda button at the top of the screen to see what else we have in store for you all. And we'll see you super soon. Bye.
Bye, everyone.